Just now we have talked about Qin Dynasty and Han Dynasty, and now let's move to Tang Dynasty. And in Tang Dynasty, we there was one emperor who was very special because she was the only female emperor in the whole China's history. It was a she, not a he this time. And so, how this woman was able to become the emperor, the empress in China. Uh, this picture was today's Xi'an's old wall, and on the wall you can see there are some ancient Chinese characters decorated on the wall. Okay, if you are really interested in Chinese history, I really recommended you visit Xi'an. Okay, before the story of the empress, I'd like to give you a very brief introduction of this emperor. You see, remember in the Qin, the first dynasty, the emperor he dressed in black and red, and now this emperor he dressed in yellow, or we say the color of gold, and it was the color of the empress. Even the emperor's sons, they must get the admission of the emperor, and then they were allowed to dress in gold. Okay, so this emperor, his title was Taizong. We say Emperor Taizong, and he was the second emperor of Tang Dynasty. But he was a very hardworking emperor, and he laid a very good foundation for the future development of Tang Dynasty. Firstly, he employed many intelligent people, no matter what their backgrounds. So he always he was able to collect many good ideas for making his policies. And secondly, he was kind of the emperor who really cares about the life of civilians, and he redivided the national land into small pieces, and gave the small piece of land to those farmers, peasants, to ensure they have their own time to make their own benefits. So he won the support of ordinary people, commoners. And thirdly, he married his daughter, one of his daughters, Princess Wencheng, to the king of Tubo. At that time, it was called Tubo. Today we say Tibet. And in order to to strengthen the relationships between the country of Tubo and the Tang Dynasty. Okay, and then they can avoid the wars, and then they do not have to sacrifice numerous people's lives. Okay, so this emperor he also wants the support of minorities. Okay, and then the only female emperor. Okay, now about her, it's all something real. Okay, it's not legend. Uh, her name was Wu Zetian. Her Chinese name was Wu Zetian. And when she was young, she was beautiful and she was well educated. And at the age of 14, she was selected into the palace as one of the concubines of the old emperor we just talked about. However, because that old emperor he was much older than her, so not long time after she entered the palace, the old emperor he died, he passed away, and she became a widow, very young widow. According to the palace rule at that time, all those concubines without babies for the emperor, they were not allowed to leave the palace, but to be sent to a temple to spend the rest of their lives. And she was no exception. So she was sent to the temple as nun, and she spent 2 years there. Mm. However, actually, before she was sent to the temple, she was already fell in love with a young man, and this young man, he was the youngest son of the old emperor, and it was him who was going to be the next emperor. So he was a crown prince. And so after he came to the throne, became the next emperor, he managed to bring her back to the palace. And soon she was pregnant, and she delivered the new emperor's baby. And then her position in the palace was more secure. Okay, and later the new emperor, he was not good in health. He often got sick, and every time when he was ill, he would ask her to handle those political duties, those national missions for him. So in this way, she got herself deeply involved in politics. And so finally, after the new emperor died, she became the solo dominator of the country. And then finally, she decided to claim herself to be the empress of the country, and she renamed the dynasty Zhou dynasty. So from Tang dynasty to Zhou dynasty, and she also moved the capital from Xi'an, at that time called Chang'an, to another city called Luoyang. It means she established her own dynasty. Okay, that was her story. Though she was a woman, she was considered to be a qualified empress, because when she ruled China, the Tang dynasty was still in progress. And we see like the territory of Tang dynasty was greatly expanded to the north and to the west, and she attached a lot of importance to the relationship between Tang dynasty and its neighboring countries. And she also she was keen on the development of Buddhism. So in her late years, she spent money lavishly on the constructions of Buddhist temples. Okay. Anyway, we say she made great contributions to the future development of Tang Dynasty and also China. And this was her husband's, the new emperor's monument. It was a normal one, but her monument, we say, was very special because it was an empty one, nothing on it, no words. And even today, today's historians still have no idea why she left her monument empty. I can leave this question to you. Okay, and then next emperor is called the Emperor Xuanzong. Xuanzong, after the female emperor. Usually, we divided Emperor Xuanzong's lifetime into two periods. We say the first period and the second period. During her first period, she was young, she was diligent, and he was young and he was a diligent emperor. And due to the good foundation laid by the previous emperors, so at that time, actually, Tang Dynasty became one of the most powerful empires in the world. At that time, there were two empires in the world. One was in the west, it was the Arabic Empire, and then the other was in the east, it was the Tang Empire. And at that time, the capital of Tang Dynasty, Chang'an, the Xi'an, was considered to be an international metropolis. Many foreigners, like foreign traders, foreign students, they all flocked to Chang'an to learn the more advanced culture. It was also during this time Japanese, they sent numerous overseas students to China, and they borrow the Chinese characters to make their own Japanese words. That's why today maybe some of you think like, oh, why Japanese words and the Chinese words look so similar? They also use Chinese characters. It happened from this time. Okay. However, from his second period, second period of lifetime, the emperor, he became old, and he was very, we say, very proud of himself. So he was not as hardworking as before. And what's worse, he was obsessed by a young woman, one of his concubines called Lady Yang. And after he met Lady Yang, he totally forgot, neglected his duties, and he was fooled by some of his ministers. And at that time, there was a minority general called An Lushan, the minority general, and Shi Siming was the name of another minority general. So they started a civil war against this emperor, and the emperor had no any preparations, and the only thing he could do was to run to escape, and so they flee to they escape from northern China to southern China, and following the emperor, and a huge like a large number of civilians also follow the emperor from north to the south, because northern China, especially in those major cities, they were left without protections of armies, and so people, in order to survive, they also follow the emperor to run. And finally, after 8 years, the official army, the rural army, defeated the minority army, and the emperor, he was back to his imperial palace. Though we say the emperor win, however, the situation between northern China and southern China was changed forever. Before, northern China was considered to be more developed than southern China. However, after this rebellion, more people began to move to southern China, and so the agriculture in southern China started to develop and more rapidly, and so we say this was a huge turning point in the history of China, and the influence of this turning point continued until today. In today's China, we say the northern China, the economy of northern China is not as good as southern China. The cities in southern China, especially in southeast of China, those cities are more developed, or we say rich, than northern China. Okay, and then Mongols rule in China. So before the Qin dynasty, Han dynasty, and the Tang dynasty, they were all dominated by Han people. But from Yuan dynasty, from 13th century to 14th century, China was ruled by Mongols. Do you know him? He was considered to be the father of Mongols. Genghis Khan. In Chinese, we say Chenghis Han. So at the end of the 12th century, Genghis Khan, he united all the Mongolian tribes and established Mongol Empire. And we know Mongols, we say, we can see they were very good at fighting, especially like horse fighting. Okay, wherever they go, they can quickly conquer that area. Okay, and this was the Mongol Empire, and China actually was only part of the whole Mongol Empire at that time. Okay, and then Genghis Khan, he died. And he left his unfinished career to his grandson Kublai. Kublai, he was in charge of the China part, and it was Kublai. He established Yuan dynasty, and the western part were also parts of Mongol Empire, but China, the Chinese part was called the Yuan dynasty at that time. And it was the Mongols, they started the construction of Beijing as capital because they moved the capital from Xi'an to Beijing. So Beijing as capital of China actually started from Mongols, from Yuan dynasty. Okay, and then let's talk about Ming dynasty. And Ming dynasty was the second last dynasty in China. In Ming dynasty, I only want to talk about two events. The first one, I want to say, have you heard travel voyage? Okay, but we all know Columbus' discovery of Latin America, right? Okay, very few people have heard of the travel voyage in China. Okay, in Ming Dynasty, the second emperor of the Ming Dynasty, he was very ambitious, and he tried to show off his power to China's neighboring countries. So he decided to dispatch this general Zheng He, here his name, to visit the neighboring countries. This time, not on horse, but on sea, by sea. Okay, so the emperor, the Ming Dynasty government invited huge money in making the fleets, the fleets, and big and small fleets together, around more than 300 fleets follow the Zheng to the other countries by sea. We say this time. Okay, this was called the travel voyage. Okay, and we also see it's like the Silk Road by sea. And wherever Zheng He arrived, like Zhang Qian, the general in Han Dynasty, they also made friendly relationships and they established official diplomatic relationships between China and the other countries you see, and everything was in harmony. And let's compare this with Western colonization. Around the same time, the Western people, they started the colonization of the whole world. They enslaved African people and brought those African people, those African slaves, to Latin America to work for them and to dig out gold. And they took all those gold back to Europe to support the development of industrialization in Europe. But so we say the Western way was very brutal, inhuman, but the Chinese way was very friendly, was in peace. However, the Western people, they made huge fortune, and Europe began to surpass surpass China, or we say the West began to surpass the Eastern, and so they entered a new era called the modern era, and like machines became a part of life However, in China, we say China would still continue the old traditional way, to develop diplomatic relationship. So China actually was left behind the West. We became poor, but the West became rich, huge rich. And the worst thing was that China, our emperor, had no any idea how developed, how much progress the West already made. And so we see at that time, China was like an old person, very old, ignorant. Okay, we see this was the root Zheng He and his delegation group took from southeast China through the Indian Ocean, and as far as they traveled as far as to the Red Sea, today's Egypt, the Red Sea there. Okay, so we say the Western people during this time they were the victories, and so the written was the history. The history was written by winners, and they were winners. That's why most of you have heard the Columbus discovery of Latin America, but not Zheng He and his story. Okay, the second event I want to mention about in Ming Dynasty was the Forbidden City. We all know the Forbidden City was a bridge construction, a palace construction. It was built from 1406 to 1420. The Ming Emperor they spent 14 years on the construction of the Forbidden City, and the Forbidden City actually it was the home of the emperor's family. Such a big home. Okay, we see the major colors of the Forbidden City was red and yellow. I told you yellow or the color of gold was the emperor's color. Only emperor can use this color. And this was Tiananmen Square. And from here on, it was the first palace, the second palace, the third palace. And the first three palaces was called from the front court for the emperor to meet his ministers to discuss the national events, conferences, and on both sides, we call the western and eastern palaces, like his concubines, his wives, and his sons and daughters lived on each side. Okay, and if you have the opportunity to visit China, sure, you must come here, visit here. Okay, this was in the right center of China, of Beijing. Okay, next let's talk about the last dynasty of China, Qing dynasty. Here I want to say, like the Yuan dynasty, the dominators in China at that time were not Han people, but this time it was Manchuria. We say Man people. So they were also minorities, you see, on horse. Okay. And the Qing dynasty was also usually divided into two periods. We say the first half of the period, the second half of the period. And during the first half of the period, inside China, domestically we say everything was okay. The society was stable and the people enjoyed a peaceful life. And these three emperors of Qing dynasty, they were all qualified emperors. Okay. However, at the same time, in the Western world, we say they already succeeded to finish their industrialization, and the merchants have become part of people's life, and about this, the Chinese emperors knew nothing, and so actually the Western people they were huge threat. We say huge threat to China, but our emperors was totally ignorant of that. Okay, and this picture was the typical Man women, the women of Man people style. It's different from Han people. Okay, and because Qing dynasty was the last dynasty, it's already like around the 20th century, and so we can see some authentic photos. And for Man people, hair for them was very important. Both men and women, they have their hair very long. Okay, this was Qing dynasty's territorial. And here, let's see this slide. Okay, this woman, she was not the empress, but she was the last very influential and powerful woman in China. She was called Empress Dowager Cixi, and we also call her the Dragon Lady. Firstly, she manipulated her son, and after her son died, she manipulated her nephew to control the court. So she was the the actual dominator in the last moments of this dynasty. And but she was kind of we say she was kind of a greedy and a selfish ruler. Um, when she ruled China, there was going to be a navy war between China and Japan. At that time, the Chinese Navy was in great need of updating its fleets, the warship. And actually, the money was already collected by the government. But some ministers, in order to make her happy, to celebrate her birthday, they removed the money from the army and to construct a new garden, a new rural garden as her birthday gift. It was the new summer palace. It was the new summer palace. So the old summer palace was destroyed by French and British Joint Army, and then they built a new summer palace. Okay, and then let's know the last emperor of China. So all the three pictures, actually, they were about one person. He was the last emperor of China. His name is Pu Yi. When he was very young, only 3 years old, he was made the emperor. He went to the throne to be the emperor, and at that time he was controlled by the ministers. And then later on, when he grew up, he was captured by Japanese and controlled by Japanese. Japanese even took him to northeast China. They founded a fake China there and made him the emperor there. And later on, when the Second World War was going to the end and the Soviet Union came to China to support the war in China, so Soviet Union found him from Japanese and took him back to Soviet Union. And so until the establishment of New China, he was returned by Soviet Union to China, and she was sent to some kind of schools to receive new education as a commoner. So he was not the emperor anymore. So we can see, though he was born to be an emperor, but as he was the last emperor, and the dynasty was going to the end, so his whole life was always in the control of the other hands, not in his own hand. So we see his life was kind of full of miseries. But fortunately, in his last years, he enjoyed a few years of free time as a common person. And we also call him puppet emperor, like the emperor was controlled by others. Okay, so finally, we see like the Qing dynasty, the last dynasty of China, was already very weak. And in 1911, finally, the Qing dynasty was overthrown by modern revolution, and the Republic of China was founded in 1911. But the civil war was not stop here, was not finished. And finally, in 1949, October 1st, Chairman Mao, he stood on the Tiananmen Square and declared to all of the world that the People's Republic of China was founded. And so today's China was from today's China was from 1949 until today. We were under the leadership of the Communist Party. Okay, that's my lecture. I hope after my course, you may have a better understanding of China's history and China's culture. And I really welcome you to visit China in the near future. Okay, thank you very much. Bye bye.